Toot toot. Please welcome to the stage the Lord Mayor.
Much harder walking up those stairs in heels than I'd anticipated. Hello everyone, you are so welcome to City Hall on what is Youth Day at COP26. It's so important that we're having these conversations here today. I'm on the panel as well, so I don't want to talk too much now. We'll leave the discussion for the panel, but just to say that as a council, we declared a climate emergency in 2019, and since then we've been working really hard. We have a fantastic climate unit. I think you all know Richard, and obviously our climate commissioner Debbie and the team are doing such fantastic work driving the policy. We have really committed politicians within council. Councillor Seamus de Puig is at the back there and is a very active voice, and we're very keen to do what we can, and we recognize that young people's voices are central to this. And I know young people are fed up with this patronizing, you give us hope for the future because you don't want us to be hopeful, you just want us to act now, and we recognize that. But we also recognize how we act with the urgency that we need to is by seeing things through your eyes. And what's not that normal for politicians is to think beyond electoral cycles, and you really force us to think in the long term, which is what we have to do to tackle this. So really excited to hear the findings of the report. Congratulations on all the work that's being done, and I'm really looking forward to discussing together what more we can be doing together to tackle this. So enjoy the afternoon, and thank you again.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. So, as you heard, we are going to be hearing the findings of a report, and after that we'll get a bit of reaction and also hear some of your questions, both here and for anybody joining us online. So please prepare your questions, and we will have our roving reporter, Kieran, who will be going around with a microphone so you can put your questions to our panel later on. Also, there is an evaluation sheet on your table. If you get a chance during this or just after to fill that in, it would be much appreciated. Thank you. So, to present the survey's findings, I'd like to welcome up to the stage Chloe Ferguson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, gosh. So first of all, I just want to extend a warm welcome on behalf of Belfast Climate Commission's Youth Working Group to everyone here today. It's been a bit of a journey to get here. We've been working over the last year to really pull our projects together, pull our research together, and really just from the outset, I would like to say thank you to Teresa and Richard, who have really pulled this together. So first of all, can we just have a wee round of applause for them? Student voice and youth voice is so important, and as we've seen through Youth Day at COP26 this year, the young voice is crying out for action on climate change, and we need the staff and we need the support from those who have come before us to really help us shape our vision. So we're so grateful and we're so thankful for those who've been helping to facilitate that. So just to give a bit of context, originally our chair, Maria, was meant to be up here today, and so I'm a stand-in. I would love to put all credit to her and the amazing leadership she has shown to us through this process. But I will do my best to summarise our findings and really highlight what the young people have told us in return and the recommendations coming out of that. So to give a bit of context, the Belfast Climate Commission Youth Working Group was initially established through the Community Climate Action Working Group in the Belfast Climate Commission. So this group consists of representatives from the following organisations: so Belfast Youth Forum, Ulster Wildlife, National Museums and Extinction Rebellion, and the Climate Action Group in Queen's, SU, which I'm a part of, Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, and Belfast Hills Partnership. So this group came together with a passion and a longing to really bring climate education and bring the climate crisis to the forefront of everyone's minds in the city and in the country. So the group produced some strategic aims, and the ones we're going to be really focusing in on today are the increased awareness of climate challenges amongst the youth of Belfast, and the increased capacity of young people to slow climate change. So essentially, we wanted to go out with a bit of a litmus test before we do any other work. Where are young people so we can meet them where they're at? So this is where the survey you have in front of you today comes in. So we've been working on designing a youth-led action research project to explore young people's views. Oh gosh. Thank you. To explore young people's views and opinions across a range of issues associated with climate change. The aim of this project is to inform the planning of this event to coincide with COP and really present the findings to capture the views and perspectives of young people so we can take learnings away today and really put it into practice. So after several stages of the project building our methodology, which you will find more information on the full report, this resulted in a survey of over 1,200 young people aged 13 to 24. So this purpose of the survey was to explore young people's views and opinions about a range of issues associated with climate change, particularly tied across 4 agreed themes, which included knowledge and understanding of climate change, accessing information about climate change, personal participation in climate change, and the future and the impact of it. So this was promoted out across social media and existing networks tied to Belfast Climate Commission's membership. In terms of uptake and demographic contributors, to contextualise this a bit more in the findings, the largest percentage of participants were those in the 13-year-old age bracket, with the least surveyed around 23 to 24. So a complete breakdown of that can be found in the full report. So just to put together some of the key findings, some of the headline statistics that we'd like to share with you today. 98% of young people have heard of climate change, with 28% suggesting that they were very concerned about it, and a further 24% extremely concerned. 30% of young people indicated that they have been affected by climate change, with 42% stating that they have not. So as you can see through these statistics, there's already a disparity amongst young people in terms of what they feel like they've been impacted. There's a lot of differing opinion. So for those who had been affected, 41% experienced anxiousness, so this climate anxiety, with 13% suggested that they had become distracted from other things, or reaffirming this other survey findings about the rise in eco-anxiety. So we're now digging into this a bit further. What are the most important climate change issues to young people? So ranked from the highest to descending order, we obviously have global warming, a bit of an issue, extinction of animal species, sea and river pollution, fossil fuels, reducing water, flooding, overpopulation, litter and traffic congestion. An interesting point just to pull out here at this time is the magnitude of global issues being ranked over the individualistic choices of society, like traffic coming at the bottom. So coming out of that, how do you receive your information about climate change? Where are young people finding out the knowledge and the learning and the carbon literacy behind it all? They were provided with a comprehensive list of sources and asked to comment on the level of information about climate change they received from each one. The analysis revealed that the most popular source of receiving information was through social media, 89%. For any of you who are on social media, I'm sure that's not a surprise. Followed by through a school or college, 83%, TV and film, 67%. In terms of sources that did not provide information, the most popular response was work, followed by religious settings and youth groups. So bringing this question on with a different perspective, they were next relating to levels of trust in relation to different potential providers of information. So the analysis revealed that overwhelmingly, a majority of young people trust information either a lot or a little from scientists. So there's, again, that disparity. Either people overwhelmingly trust scientists, or there's, at the complete other end of the spectrum, there's not really a lot of in-between when it comes into that. So this was followed by climate change groups, and then schools, colleges, and teachers. It's interesting to note that just over 1/3 of young people would trust local politicians. Again, either a lot or a little. There's a little bit less in between. In relation to sources which respondents would not trust, the results suggest that 39% of young people would not trust local politicians very much or at all. This was again followed by energy suppliers and the media at 34%. So who do you think should have ultimate... Okay, I think I skipped one. Who do you think should have ultimate responsibility to reduce the negative effects of climate change? That was the next question we asked because, someone has to do something. There has to be an answer to the question, who should be working on this? And obviously the answer is everyone. Everyone can contribute, but who should have that ultimate responsibility? So in relation to identifying who was responsible for reducing these negative effects, the most popular response noted that young people was the UK government at 47%, followed by individuals themselves at 21%. The least popular response was attributed to the local council, followed by climate change groups. So again, a lot of the folks here doing the work should not have the ultimate responsibility according to this survey in terms of promotion out. Another pull out here is a focus on mass organisational responsibility against the individual perspective in the ultimateness. Moving away from a bit more of the in-depth data and looking at the top-level statistics, off the back of what has already been highlighted, this summarises young people's response. 88% of young people thought something could be done to reduce the negative effects of climate change, compared with 3% who were a little bit less optimistic. 50% of young people had acted out of concern for climate change. Of those young people, 85% have reduced their plastic waste, 78% walked, 63% used public transport, constantly taking these actions to do their bit. Reading about general issues of the climate change online had been the most significant influence on these young people, again highlighting the role of media and online culture in the shaping of our education. 53% of young people thought if others around me, whether that's in people in power or elected representatives, were able to put more effort in to protect the environment, then it would increase their confidence and capacity to engage with this issue of climate change, taking a lead from their leaders. Again, 82% of young people strongly disagreed with the statement that climate change is not real, and 67% of the respondents either disagreed or strongly disagreed with the view that it was too late to do anything about climate change. So this hope and optimism coming through. 74% either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that there needs to be a focus on greener employment opportunities, and 87% either agreed or strongly agreed that we all have a role to play in protecting the environment. Interestingly, and something I think that's really important to emphasise here, is that 55% of young people either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that I feel ignored by adults and people in power. So for all the adults in the room, for all the politicians or those who are heading up the organisations, I want you to take that in, that half of this room, by that survey's results, don't trust and feel ignored. So what do young people say? So we also had a room for comments, we had room for qualitative data, and so we're just picking out some of the highlights. Again, more of this can be found in the report, but these kind of summarise the themes that were being touched on. So, there are no second chances when it comes to our planet. We need to make changes now. I feel like no one cares, and it makes me annoyed because we all pay the consequences of climate change. I feel that the environment will continue to deteriorate and many species will be endangered or go extinct. Bleak and not hopeful because nothing has really changed to prevent more of our ecosystems being destroyed. Again, that highlights the need for constant and moving power on this that goes past COP26, goes past an annual delivery plan. It needs to be enveloped into every corner of our lives. So, taking all of this into consideration, what are the observations and actions out of this survey that as Belfast Climate Commission Youth Working Group we are recommending to be put in place for implementation? So we've developed a series of actions in hope that they will raise knowledge and awareness of climate change and support those already engaged in the issues. It is also hoped that further discussions and debates will support the group and deliver on its own action plan, so an action plan that you can find of ours online. The findings of this survey repeatedly reinforce the view that climate change is of significant interest to young people, that they are fearful for the future. When you look at other surveys across the sector, that's actually a very highly filled out one, and it really highlights the issue is at the tip of everyone's tongues. In light of the importance of the issue, it may be appropriate to consider the creation of an independent youth climate commissioner. He is responsible for advocating on young people's concerns and facilitating engagement across stakeholders, so all parts of society. Alongside a commissioner, there is also scope to develop a training programme for young people so they can become peer climate educators and support further engagement between young people and those tasks with implementing relevant policy. Our second finding suggests that young people trust scientists in terms of accessing information about climate change. However, it does appear that they have less confidence in politicians. Therefore, it may be appropriate for elected representatives to use multiple platforms with experts. So when you see on TV, you see a politician come out with a scientist to talk about COVID, in the field to climate change to support delivery of key messages and policy launches. According to the responses from the survey, the young people trust schools and colleges as places to receive information about climate change. That's probably quite a good signal. Therefore, it is important that educational settings and staff have the actual tools that they need and resources and expertise to engage with young people on issues pertaining to climate change. We need to upskill our staff, and there should be an emphasis on teacher training and continued professional development on issues like carbon literacy and the Eco Skills programme. The findings overwhelmingly show that young people access their information relating to climate change through online platforms. However, only a very small number were aware of the 2 climate change bills going through the Assembly currently. There may be an opportunity for our political institutions to engage with young people more, to better inform their own methods, style and tone surrounding their communications on issues relating to climate change. There is a need to simplify the language and terminology associated with climate change and ensure that young people can be a part of that discussion. The analysis of this survey revealed that young people supported the development of greener employment opportunities in turn with a just transition, and there is an appetite for more information regarding this topic to be used as a vehicle for politicians, policymakers, and young people to constructively engage on producing tangible outputs which look to address the negative impacts of climate change. So that's the survey. a little bit of everything, a lot going on. Thank you for listening. We're going to pass over to Bara, and we're going to go to the panel. But I want you to take in what we said here today. Young people are in crisis, there's eco-anxiety, and they're unsure about who to look to for the answers. Those who they are looking to don't necessarily have the tools or experience or the funding or the support needed, and those who society is telling them they should be looking to perhaps isn't upskilled enough or equipped or trusted enough to do it. So some things to take away in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you. Okay, so firstly, we're going to get a bit of reaction from our panel here with us today. We have Minister Mallon, Lord Mayor. We also have the Children's Commissioner, and we have Andrea, Celeste, and Georgia. And then after that, we will open the floor to you guys for your questions. So get thinking. I'm sure you can think of some very difficult questions to put to them all. And also anybody who's watching online, you can send in your questions that way as well. So, but firstly, if I can go to Minister Mallon, just to get a reaction to some of those findings.
I think it's very sobering, Bara. We know that people are very cynical, and particularly young people, of politicians, but that's a very stark statistics, and we need to sit up and take notice of it. I was also struck by the lack of trust, if I maybe picked it up wrong, in the media. That wasn't something that I had anticipated, and I can see that coming out in other areas, so I was a bit more taken aback by that. But what I really took heart in was the fact that 67% disagreed that it was too late to act. So while there was frustration and a lack of trust in people in positions of power, there was a very strong element there that young people are hopeful that we can do something about it and that it isn't too late. So that came through very strongly to me.
Lord Mayor, similar to you yourself, what did you think of the findings of the survey?
Yeah, I mean, not to echo what Nicola said, but it's worrying, and it's something we know. What I find really interesting is also how I view things. So I'm very conscious that we have to look at industry and government setting targets and law, and in terms of responsibility, we have to look at that. But I think sometimes there is this disparity between how maybe we as politicians look at issues and how younger people do. And my colleague Seamus used a wonderful line during the week about how young people have this acute sense of custodianship for the planet. And what I see is that personal responsibility coming through so much. And you're not responsible, and it's not on the individual, but we can all learn from that as well. So I think in the absence of government leadership, young people are taking it on themselves, and that's what this survey is telling me, and really they shouldn't have to, you know.
And the Children's Commissioner, are you surprised at all by any of the findings today?
No, to be honest, Barra, and I don't want to repeat because I agree everything, obviously, with everything Nicola and Kate said. What I want to say something to you about young people being in crisis. I actually don't think young people are in crisis. I think what you're in is you can see the crisis our planet is in, and you're trying to get us to sort it out with you. And you're pushing us, because what I do see, one of the things that did really worry me was 41% of young people feel anxious about climate change and worry about it. So I suppose you are really in crisis then, so I'll take it back. And that really worries me, as if young people don't have enough to worry about. We have put this on top of them. But again, to reiterate, is that the optimism that we can do something about it. But the planet is in crisis, and young people are making us wake up to it. And I am very clear, we wouldn't be having these conversations around the globe if it wasn't for young people, like the young people who took part, like the four of you, all of you in this room, and all of you who have protested and have gone out on strike. And we absolutely have to do something about it as individuals, but also as a collective.
And Georgia, some stark findings there. Is there any more you think you can add to that, or do you think it's basically as black and white as what those findings suggest?
I think it is as black and white as the findings suggest. Later on, I'm going to go over like some of my thoughts on them. So,
what are your thoughts on the findings altogether?
Well, I think it's kind of I think the parts about young people not trusting politicians was quite like, I'm glad that 45% do, but then 55% is a very high number. So I would wonder, like, what can be done to fix that? And you were saying about lack of leadership, so I was wondering what can be done about that and what you would think about that.
It's a great question, and it's something that I've built into my term as Lord Mayor. You know, I strongly believe that real change comes from government setting targets and from industry, but that we keep it on the agenda by doing our own bit. So as Lord Mayor, I've had a monthly environmental challenge where I've been cycling into City Hall and going plastic free, and Cooler and I are doing a great one this month together. And I know it's not going to change the world. By looking at it through your eyes and acknowledging that, I think seeing it through young people's eyes personalizes it, but also makes...
We have to find a way of making them do it. So any idea anyone has, I'm up for it, because we have to make them act.
Thank you. I'll go to Andrea next for your thoughts on today's findings. Any points you want to bring out from it?
I think today's findings really reflected, there were surveys done around Europe and around the world about climate change and the youth's take on it, but I think this really brought it very, very local, and it really shows young people's distress to the climate crisis as well, and how they're, as a young person myself, how when we're hearing about all these different targets and all these different things that are being implemented in Northern Ireland, but they are not really acted upon, and when young people go on the streets and they're not listened to, and I think that brings it so close to home. I wasn't really surprised, to be fair. I've done climate activism for about 2.5 years now. I wasn't really surprised by the finding of young people not trusting a lot of young people not trusting politicians, because I think young people have been out there, they have been striking, they have been asking politicians to make changes, yet that is not happening with the urgency. They're not acting with the urgency that they should be, and we're all really scared. And there is a lot. I know a lot of people who have eco-anxiety. When you hear about all these terrible, awful things that are happening around the world, but also very, very locally, all the species that are going extinct, the fact that emissions are not decreasing at the rate that they should. it sparks so much stress and so much hopelessness for our future. So it's not really surprising, and I feel like words are not enough. And as Minister Mallon was saying about, yes, there are sometimes bad politicians, there are climate deniers, but I think we're past that stage. And while there are people who want to make changes and who are speaking the truth, and who young people are like, oh yes, they've said the right thing, but they're not doing the right thing. So I think it's sort of it's that balance as well.
I mean, it's a good point. Even if all the politicians here were to do the right thing and the climate bills do pass, how does a small part of the world like this then go on to influence other parts of the world who maybe are bigger polluters, bigger deniers of climate change? How do we do that?
So this morning I met the mayor of Lahti in Finland. They're the eco city of the year, and he was telling me their city's quite similar to Belfast. Their kind of industrial, lost industry really impacted the city, unemployment. This city now is on track to be net zero by 2025. It's inspirational. And he was telling the story, and he said it started with a lake. They had this really horrible lake that was polluted, and it was really impacting the quality of life. And the community got together and started to act, and they started to change things. Most social change happens not because of politicians, but because of people who are driving it. And it's transformed the city. It's such an inspiring story. That one city, not dissimilar in size to ours, and in so many ways to ours, is now an example to the world. He was sitting there with us, and he was telling us how they've changed. And I was sitting there listening, thinking, we should have these ambitions. We need to be ambitious, and collectively we need to. So yes, we do our bit and we try, and sustainability is a journey. It's constant. We have to keep working towards it. But of course we can make an impact. We could be exactly like them and inspire other cities to be the same. So I don't think you can ever look at it as, oh, well, there's no point in us making that much of a difference, because what impact is it really going to have? Collectively, it has an impact, but also psychologically, it forces us to keep being ambitious and encourages others to up their game. So I definitely think there's so much that we can do, and to not underestimate our power as a city.
And Minister, some simple things we can do as well, just to build up on that point, isn't there?
There absolutely is. And Northern Ireland is leading the way in something. So, I'm responsible for transport, public transport, and transport is the second highest emitter of greenhouse gases. And I've been investing in zero emission buses. So in 2023, Derry will be the first city across these islands to have a zero emission urban bus fleet. Yesterday, or maybe the day before, we unveiled the first ever double-decker electric bus on the island of Ireland. And when all of those vehicles, there's 100 zero-emission and 45 low-emission buses come into operation, TransLink will have the fourth largest fleet of zero-emission vehicles. So in some areas, we're doing well, but it's not enough. We need to keep pushing forward. And I think going back to the survey, Barra, there was a statistic in that it was 87% of the young people agree that we all have a role to play. And I think that's really important, because those with the power have the greatest shoulders and should be doing the heavy lifting. So you need the ambitious legislation to drive the policy, but the legislation dictates where the money goes. And that's why it's really important. But also as individuals. So when I took up this job, I didn't really know what Northern Ireland Water was. I didn't have an appreciation of turning on my tap in the morning and getting clean drinking water and getting all of the wastewater collected. But if you turn off your tap while you're brushing your teeth, if you do what I do now, is you turn off the shower when you're washing your hair, all of these wee things actually make a big difference to the security of our water supply. So it's about doing the small things, walking instead of jumping into the car, using public transport, conserving your use of water. All of those things, if everybody's doing them, actually amount up to a big amount.
And Commissioner, I suppose in a way then, with so much appetite amongst the young people today for that change, the future surely looks bright, because when they become of age where they can become politicians or decision makers, then surely it's going to make that a little bit easier to bring about the things that we need to tackle climate change.
I don't think we've got that time. I think we have a thing in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that says children should be listened to now. and they're screaming very loudly at us. We don't have the time. If these guys stood for election in my ward, of course I would vote for them, but you're not and you can't, and we have to act now in order to give them half a chance to succeed. Kate talked about her son. I think about my children have a go at me about their grandchildren, and I can't even imagine what the world would be like for my children's grandchildren, my own grandchildren, if I have them. So yes, it will be a better place when they get in control. But we don't have time to faff about, and we need to listen to them now. They need to have a say in how we run the world now.
Okay, and finally we go over to Celeste. Celeste, you can give us your views on today's finding. What do you take away from it, and what do you want to see from it?
Well, I was asking the people inside here that we also found a statistic about 76% of young people didn't know about the agreements going ahead. So even though you're all talking about, the future and that the climate bills are going to go and see if it should be agreed, but young people seem to not even know of its existence. I'm going to talk in a bit about how 50%, it's like half and half that young people, well, I'll bring it up on my phone, half of young people did take action in the last 6 months, but then the other half didn't. And we need to, even though we're all here today talking about climate change and talking about the impact we all need to make, we need to include everyone in that rather than full steam ahead. We need to work together to make that full steam ahead.
Can we make it any clearer to what's happening locally and what we're aiming to achieve, Minister?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's very difficult to know if there's a bill passing through Stormont. There's a disconnect between Stormont and, normal people, and that needs to be addressed. But I suppose it's around the communication. So, I know, but it's stark up there where young people get their information from. It's on social media, it's in schools. So we need to be making sure that the right information is being put out there, and it's being put out in a way that people can understand and relate to. And I think politicians aren't great at that, and Stormont isn't great at that as well. So for me, there's a big improvement here around communication. The other thing is participation. Young people are excluded from decision making, and when we all came back from the 3 years, we agreed in New Decade, New Approach that we would have like a citizens' assembly, and I've committed as a Minister for Infrastructure to having a youth assembly on infrastructure, and we hope to see that set up early next year. And that's about bringing young people in to tell me what they want to see in terms of inclusive and sustainable infrastructure. Because I'm very conscious that I'm taking decisions worth millions and millions of pounds of your money, public money, and I'm defining the infrastructure and the opportunities of our young people for generations to come. So for me, it's absolutely right that young people are around the table, not just feeding their views, but part of my decision making. And I think we should be seeing more of that right across our central government.
Okay, look, thank you very much. We're going to open the floor now to you guys and anyone who's listening at home or else in the office who want to answer, have some questions answered. We do have our roving reporter here, Kieran, who's going to give me a hand. You will forgive us for having to use these big stick microphones for social distancing and COVID times that we're in. So if it does look a bit strange, that's why. So if you want to put your hand up first, I think we have a lady over here. On table number 1, I will call it.
Is this on, yeah?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, super.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say it is brilliant that the young people have put together such information. I think it's very valuable, and it'll be unwise for the politicians not to look into it more deeply. There's 3 things that kind of popped up to me that are kind of linking one to another. The 35% of the young people that 35% trust local politicians, either little with information about climate change, and also that 53% of young people trust other people that are in power they trust other people that will give them information that are in power. And then there was also, am I just mixing it up and saying it? 55% of young people either agreed strongly or strongly agreed with the statement that I feel ignored by by adults and people in power. I just thought those three things are saying something, because I feel in as much as young people are screaming, politicians are not listening. And young people are screaming a lot more than before, and politicians are not listening. But also, I think the fact that young people are only allowed to vote when they're seen as adults is a big thing that needs to be looked into, because then they are ignored very easily. But at the same time, if you look at some of the rules and the legislation that allows young people, there's something that allows, I think, hold on, I've got it here. If you look at the fact that young people, the legal age for a young person, the age of consent for sex in England is 16. We are saying at 16, a young person can make that decision to be sexually active. But we're saying at 18 only can a young person vote. So are we going to ignore young people because they're not 18 yet and try and overlook those issues that young people bring to the table in as much as they're shaping this future that is theirs? Is it because they do not have the political vote? And also, how long do we plan to do this for? Because we continue to ruin it ourselves as adults.
Commissioner, would that be some concerns that you would share?
So I'm a big fan of votes at 16. I've signed up the campaign. I've talked about it loads. I think most of the Stormont parties agree with votes at 16, but not all. And I'll leave you to work out which ones don't. One doesn't. So I think we need to look at it again, probably for the next assembly. I think there's quite a lot of things in New Decade, New Approach that would begin to resolve some of these, including age discrimination legislation. So there are things we need to do. So big fan of lowering the voting age, a big fan of it. But I think there is something very, again, I go back to repeating what I just said previously, there's something very fundamental about how we treat children's views and how we treat their experiences. No one knows what it's like to be a child in Northern Ireland other than a child in Northern Ireland. And in my job, I'm paid to talk to them and listen to them. But I've never had a conversation with a young person where I think they live in cloud cuckoo land. And I agree, because they don't vote. Some politicians don't listen to them. But I think we need to change that. We need to change that, because it's their world now, and it'll be their world in the future, long past after I've left it.
Minister Mallon, how do we change that?
I think we should be lowering the voting age to 16. It's a no-brainer. But also, people need to vote. Yeah. So many people here in Northern Ireland who can vote don't vote. Some politicians bank on that. Also, the politics of fear plays out here very strongly. Why do parties play on fears? Because they know that it mobilises voters. So voters then have to start saying, we're going to vote and elect you because you're actually taking action on the issues that matter to us. And I think the biggest thing that I would love to see for Northern Ireland is that we have a normalised place where people are voting on those issues. They're voting on what you're doing on climate action. They're voting on what you're doing to tackle poverty, the housing crisis, all of those things. So, politicians need to step up and do a lot more, but I would appeal to the electorate as well, because you hold the power every time an election comes around, and sometimes you're made to feel deliberately powerless when you're not.
I suppose, Mayor, it's not the job of the youth, but perhaps because of the climate we're in, it's the youth that has to persuade the adults to go and do the right thing and vote for the policies that they want voted through. Isn't that right?
Yes, and obviously, people at the age of 16 should vote. One thing that I've really realised in my term is I put young people at the heart of it. So every council meeting, I start with a letter from a child or young person. I had a 5-year-old who wrote to me because he needs a new heart, and it was about organ donation. Young people who wrote about accessibility, who need improved public transport. I took that letter to the CEO of TransLink, and he's now engaging with that school and with those people. You have power. Young people have extraordinary power. The most change I've been able to implement since I've been Lord Mayor is with those letters. It's not me setting up a meeting saying, you need to do this. It's me taking this letter and saying, this is the voice of young people. What are you doing about it? They all jump. They all act. So I think that's how we can enable it a bit more as well, to recognize that we're not trying to repeat things that young people have said, but just creating the space so that they are listened to. And I started that with my letters honestly, between all of us, it was because I thought it would help encourage young people to get involved in politics, but also because it's so adversarial, I thought it would help set the tone. And I thought if the politicians felt like young people were watching them, maybe they'd behave a little bit better. I hadn't expected how it would be so powerful as a lobbying tool. You have so much power, it's there. We as politicians just need to be better at bringing it into the fore. Because honestly, the most change I've been able to implement is as a result of those letters.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any other questions in the audience? Lady here in the green t-shirt.
Hi, everybody. I suppose I want to ask this of the Minister. Essentially, our executive are there and we're asking them to make changes, but do you feel that they actually understand and are literate with themselves around climate change, and could they benefit essentially from some form of training around that? And my second point is around 83% trust the info that they get from their teachers, but essentially currently in the teacher training, having been a teacher for 12 years, there is no mandated training to educate our staff, and we did a recent survey with teachers just 2 weeks ago, and over 75% of them come back to say they're not even confident to talk about it because they don't know or have the knowledge around it. So how do we address this? So firstly about the executive being trained, and secondly about how do we support our teachers to essentially then support our youth?
Yeah, so I wasn't aware of that, and in terms of teachers' feelings on that, and it's not right that on one of the biggest issues and challenges of the day, the teachers don't feel confident enough to be talking to young people about it, so that needs to change. I'm also very conscious that teachers are up to their eyes being parents, teachers, social workers, all of those things. So I don't know about mandating training, and that's just my instinction, but absolutely there should be greater support provided. In terms of the executive, it's difficult around the executive because you have 5 parties, and you have 5 parties for very different political viewpoints along the spectrum and ideological ones. I suppose my frustration on climate is you'd imagine it would be the one area where we could put out some of the other differences aside. It's a bit tense at the minute because there is the 2 climate change bills coming through. Again, I don't know if it's training, but this is why I said before about a citizens' assembly. When you open up our politics and you bring in expertise and our young people and citizens, that's the best training that there is. So that's where I think is probably a better way, rather than saying to the ministers, right, you're going to go on a training course, because they just may not pay attention to it and not learn anything. But they do need to be priced open and talk to people and listen to the experts. And I think that's one of the things that's missing from government. It's a closed shop. It needs to be priced open. Experts need to be brought in. We need to be shining a light on it, because it's not about losing power. It's actually making better decisions and having better outcomes.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I think we had a question from the young man at the back wearing the black t-shirt there.
When we were talking about the 16 voting age, I just think anytime I've engaged in democracy, or in the last 20 years, we seem to have a democratic deficit. And it's hard for me to think that the executive will fight against climate change if they are constantly fighting amongst themselves. And I know I don't have the particular party representatives here that I would want to talk to on this issue, but I think that's an important question. How can we think of a future about fighting against climate change when it's hard for us to actually sort out our democratic processes?
Minister Mall already alluded to that there's difficulties, surprising difficulties, I suppose. It's the one big issue that concerns everyone, but there's differences. How do we address that?
Well, we're able to do it in Belfast City Council. We're 8 political parties in this council, and we work pretty well, don't we, Seamus? I think we do, kind of, mostly. Around climate change, we're invested in the same patch, and we understand that we need to act. We're able to agree that, Stormont is really dysfunctional, and one of the main problems with Stormont is that every permanent secretary just answers to their minister. It's not designed to work in that kind of collaborative way which Belfast City Council does. We've got a climate commissioner who's making sure that every department is looking at it joined up, because climate is not just, it's not just, water and cycling infrastructure and what we're doing to connect our spaces. It's education, it's housing, communities, it's all the different departments. So I think force, and they did tell that I had a meeting with them, and I with some of the officials, and I said it was really bad that they work as silos, and they got very defensive and said there is this cross-ministerial group that's working. The fact that that's there is really positive. I want to hear more about it, and I think the public need to hear more about what's happening within that. But you need to work in a joined-up approach. We're doing quite well. We can do better. We can do more, and we will be. But the reason why I think we're a relative success is because we work together. We've got amazing partnership. Professor John Barry is here. He co-chairs the Climate Commission along with our Climate Commissioner. We partner with organisations. We make sure that science is involved in that. So the Minister made a very good response. You need to have science in, but departments need to work together better.
Can you see that happening anytime soon, Minister?
There is some positive cooperation. Like, I'm going to be straight up here. I have to be. So, for example, I think it was published, we agreed it at the executive. There's an environment strategy that Minister Poots has been leading on that other officials across departments have fed into. There's the green growth strategy that he has published. There's an energy strategy that is being led by the Department for Economy, but like my officials in my department has been driving the transport element. So I don't want people thinking that we're at each other's throats on the issue of climate. There's a lot of work that's taking place, particularly among officials. When the politics goes in, you know, it can get a bit awry, but there is good work. And I suppose it comes to the fundamentals. It's to do with the legislation. So if you have really, really ambitious targets, then that's going to drive the pace of change. And that's where the difficulty is politically between parties.
Okay.
Can I just say one other thing? The mayor of Lati, who is the most inspiring person I met today, said that how they have also made a success is because their whole strategy as a city is built around the environment. Sometimes what worries me about having separate strategies, especially around these things, is that we do engage in tokenism. So this is not a criticism of the departments, but how we deal with climate needs to be built into absolutely everything. It can't be a standalone kind of separate issue. It needs to be involved in absolutely everything.
A few more questions? Yes, gentleman here at the back in the middle.
Yes, thanks very much. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the points that were made. First of all, Kula, I think made a very good point that we don't have time to wait for the young people who are in the room to progress their careers and become politicians. We don't have the luxury of the time for them to become the leaders of tomorrow. But another very positive thing that Nicola mentioned was the idea of youth forums that mirror departments. And for me, this is one of the things that's been missing. There's young people in the room here who would have taken part in the consultation events around Northern Ireland's first environment strategy over 2 years ago. And that was really great, and DERA were very good at helping facilitate young people's input into that strategy, and they've done the same thing with green growth. But for me, the big thing that's missing is not just listening to young people and listening to young people's ideas and views, but a place for them at the table when it comes to holding the powers that be to account. And for me, that is the real big missing link in all of this, is that it's great to involve young people in consultation exercises and in forums and in gathering their opinions. But if you don't then give them a seat at the table to hold politicians and people in positions of power to account for the plans and the implementation of those plans, then we're missing a trick. So my question is really actually for the young people on the panel. Would you rather be part of a shadow youth forum for different departments within Stormont? Or would you actually like to be given a seat at the table at some of the committees that will be holding politicians and others to account for the plans? And we've had lots of plans in the past, and they've all sounded great, but we all know that they haven't been delivered on. But would you prefer to be on a youth forum that shadows a department, or actually be at the table and given a position of power to help hold politicians to account for the promises that they've made?
Would that be something you would sign up to, Georgia?
I would rather have a seat at the table directly, like at the committee, just have the direct link with the people making the decisions, since they will affect my future and people all around the world's futures right now. I think the way we say politicians should listen to us, it should kind of be like, even if they do listen to us, how do we define listening? Do we define listening as truly hearing our words, understanding what they mean and the unquestionable science behind them, and putting our views on the table? Or are they just listening to us? Are they actually going to act on what we're saying? So I think having a seat at the table would help with that.
Would you be there too?
I think I speak on behalf of all the young people when I say yes, because I mean, a lot of the times, young people's views and opinions and their knowledge, usually around environmental matters or anything for that matter, is overlooked and sometimes undermined. But a lot of the time, young people would know more than some of our politicians about the climate crisis and about the need to act. And I think having a young person on at the table would also bring a new perspective to everything. I think the majority of young people are not, they're not driven by politics. They're not driven by, taking a side. They're really listening to the science, and they're making their decisions, and they're taking their views from that. So it's completely unbiased, and it is within the benefit of society as a whole. So I think we would all benefit from young people being listened to properly.
But how do you think it would work? Do you think that you would be listened to and things would change if that were to happen?
Yeah, it's what we've been saying is, like, are you being listened to or are you being heard? I think there's a great difference between them two. But the Commissioner said, like, no one knows what it's like being a child in Northern Ireland unless you are a child or a young person in Northern Ireland. So having a seat at the table and no middleman or anything to get in our way, and being able to speak what we want, like having this environment and being able to see the three of you face to face is making a difference, rather than, speaking to someone who isn't there, or we're able to actually look you in the eyes and say, we care about this issue, we need to do more.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll get a response, yeah?
Just want to say a couple of things. You're trying to do me out of a job. I'm supposed to be the middle woman. But no, you're absolutely right. Of course, they should hear directly from young people. So tomorrow, up at Stormont, the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly is sitting for its first physical meeting, and it hasn't established itself properly. But one of the things that it's supposed to do, and I hope it does, is that it will work directly with the committees, the various committees. Now, whether they'll be sitting at the table on every committee session, I'm not clear, but I certainly think that the work of each committee, particularly the big committees that the young people are interested in, should hear what those young people have to say. There's another thing I want to say, which is something they've done in Scotland, and the British government aren't very happy about it, and that's always a good sign, is to incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child into legislation. And what that will mean is it will make it a legal requirement for our government in every decision that they make to both listen to, hear, and take into account the views and experiences of children and young people, because the wee ones are very scary in their opinions and how vociferous and strong their opinions are. So for me, I'm very hopeful for the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly. Tomorrow, it's only at the beginning, but it's for all of us to make it a really successful thing and bring young people closer to the table, but also to make it a legal requirement to listen to young people, I think, is probably the only way forward.
Have you any other questions in the House? This gentleman here. Somebody had the hand over here. Sorry, just here at the front, if you wouldn't mind first.
I was just wondering, using the young people's response, how and when are you going to act on climate change?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can mostly speak just as Minister for Infrastructure. So I've set out like how I'm investing to decarbonise public transport, and we are doing a lot in that area, and we've had a number of positive announcements this week. On the issue of planning as well, I have initiated 2 reviews, so strategic reviews of renewable energies and development, but also oil and gas in respect of fracking as well. And I've also issued in the interim a moratorium, so a direction to the councils that if they're considering any of these oil and gas applications, then it needs to come to my department, because I think it's critical that we have a planning system that promotes sustainable development but protects our environment as well. On the issue of water, I launched it's called the Living with Water programme, but basically it's a new approach in terms of using our natural environment to help us to protect our water system, and our drainage system as well. So it's kind of driving those things forward. But I suppose what we need to be doing collectively as an executive is, and it comes back to the issue again about legislation, because the legislation dictates where the money goes. And I suppose it's about us all pushing in the same direction. So in a nutshell, what I would say is there is stuff that's happening, right? But the pace of change is not quick enough. But the truth is, like, when I took up the job as minister, I thought I would go in and say, right, I want to have cycle lanes all over the place. It doesn't happen like that. And that's the truth. The pace of change is difficult. You have to go through consultation. You have to go through legislation. For example, on the buses, if you look at the hydrogen buses, you know, I make an investment decision to invest in that. It takes a couple of years for those buses to be built and to go into service. So that's the other tension that we have here about wanting to drive change really fast. But then the reality that just because you want it to happen right now, it doesn't always happen. It's that time lag. So the challenge is, how do you make that time lag as short as possible? And that's the thing that I really just find frustrating as a minister, but you just have to keep pushing.
We had a gentleman here wearing a blue bomber jacket.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bara. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments that have been made. This isn't really a question for the panel, it's more of an observation. So I am one of the officials that kind of works in the background. I just wanted to maybe follow up on some of the points that has been made. Just to reassure young people here that there is a lot of work going on there. I've been working on the green growth strategy on behalf of the executive that Minister Mallon mentioned. You know, there was quite a bit of engagement, as the gentleman behind me talked about, with young people right across Northern Ireland. Just to reassure you that some of the key pieces that came out of that work with young people are included as commitments that the executive are making in the draft strategy. Also, to draw your attention to the fact that that is out at this point in time for consultation, and would urge young people to have a look at that, give their opinions on what's in there. Also included in that as one of those commitment areas is the very issue that was raised there about having a seat at the table, how you're going to be heard. So there's an opportunity to reiterate that and highlight that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? In the back, yeah, the back of the room.
Okay, so I am part of Nikki Youth Panel, and I'm involved with everyone who has the same sort of opinions as me, which is just of how much we need to act. It's unbelievable. However, aside from that, friends I know, people I know, actually young people aren't really as overall not interested in climate change as much as we all should. And the reason is, right, everyone's going through summer, going through winter, we're having colder winters, hotter summers, thinking this is great. This has become our norm. This is fine. This is great. What's actually happening is you have families who have to decide between heating in these freezing winters over food for their children, and no one's speaking about that. It's always like, oh, it's in the back of our head, it's global. It's not, it's happening right now. It's just those people are, their concern is where their next meal is coming from, not going out. They need to work. That child is probably not even going to school to take care of other things. It's unbelievable. Like, it's so hard to see it all, but like rather than a global perspective, rather than just what's going on in our own towns, like between the flood and it's right here. It's become our norm, and that's the problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. And I mean, certainly from my viewpoint, as I mentioned earlier, we've had most of our extreme weather over the past 120 years. Records go back in this first 2 decades of this century. And this year alone, we had 3 record-breaking heat days after almost a 40-year period where we had the record standing. It was smashed in 1 week in 4 times. So it clearly is something that's happening here. It's on our doorstep. But how do we address that and tackle that locally and globally? Because it's a global approach, this one, isn't it?
Can I just say a Grania made a really important point, is that not everyone has the, I don't want to say luxury, not everyone has the time to worry about the big things because they're just trying to survive in the small, with the small spaces, i.e. keeping themselves and their families fed and watered. So they don't have, because the challenge Kate and I are doing is about eating locally. And I know it's going to cost us more money, and now I can afford it. It's fine. I can afford to go to the farmer's market and get what I need. And one of the things we will be reporting on is the cost, the difference in the price. But that doesn't mean those of us who do have the headspace and do have the time not to look at addressing poverty and eradicating child poverty in particular, but also making our climate and our world and supporting our world, for want of a better term. It's not either or, it has to be both. And we were talking about politicians getting, we've got some really tricky political issues to deal with in Northern Ireland that aren't to do with the climate, and we have to deal with them. I've just come from an event where children and young people talked about the impact of the legacy of the conflict. And I'm not going to tell any politician not to address that issue. But they're clever. They're mainly clever people. They can do both. So I think for people who don't have the time to worry about the big picture, there are those of us who do have the time and who have to worry about it, and we can get on with it.
Okay, time for just a few more questions. You got one at the back, yeah?
I'm going to go for online questions here just. Yeah? Sorry, I should take my mic off. Is this from Maria then? Yeah. So, okay, so for Minister Mallon, how are you going to pressure power companies in NI to invest fully in renewables, lines like Scottish Power has in Scotland?
So this is where the Northern Ireland Executive gets tricky, because this is around roles and responsibilities. So I'm responsible for transport, not energy, but I am responsible for plan and policy. So in terms of the investment in the zero emission buses, for example, that's all coming from renewable energy that's sourced from wind farms locally. So where I can, I will be driving that agenda forward. Now, the energy strategy is coming from the Department for Economy, but my officials have been feeding into that, and I think it is all part of that. Another piece of work that I've been doing is around the e-charging infrastructure. And so it's very important for me that we have a task force that's brought together with external people as well as government departments. So for that, I will have like my officials, but also officials from the Department of Economy, but also the energy providers as well, because we need to have the e-charging infrastructure, but we also need to make sure that we have the capacity and access to the grid. So it's about pulling all of those strands together.
Okay, have you got any more questions from our online colleagues?
Not yet, but I was just going to say, only if the panel wants to reflect on the survey findings, only if they want to, like, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go to the right side first. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Go ahead.
Just a couple points I wanted to make. Is essentially, I've grew up in Northern Ireland my whole life. But for most of it, Stormont hasn't run or existed. And if I'm truthful, I felt the effects of climate change more than I've felt the effects of Stormont in my life ever. And that leads to a greater problem of where we cannot trust you in a way of we have no way to say this has happened or this has happened. Most of the greatest change I've seen in our society, I've seen without a government. And that does lead to a bigger distrust in politicians. And especially now with the politicization of climate change as a political issue, I think it's not exactly truthful in the way of climate change isn't a political issue, in the way poverty isn't a political issue. And when you make it a political issue, you open it up to being preyed upon by politicians. You open it up to being used as political promises that will never be followed through. And I feel a lot of the times, especially I've been doing things for climate change and with climate activism for a couple of years now, and it does feel a lot of the times you listen to us to placate us, and even simple things, very often I find there's an inaccessibility in them, and there is a level of privilege in even being able to address political issues that I don't think is fully addressed within activism or within politics today.
We'll go for a response for you first, if that's okay.
I mean, great point, and you're so right. And what can I say to that? You're completely right. And I think there is a piece around. So yeah, like and that's what worries me most, actually, where we are in a council now. Because we all agree that we need to do stuff around climate and there needs to be climate action, but I worry that it is just going to be platitudes and that desire isn't really there. And I'm really worried after COP26 what we do. So we're definitely going to hold some sessions in the next coming months just about what we've learned, and hopefully we could have one of these again where we discuss what happened at COP, what we've been doing on the basis of your report, and check in and show that we are actually committed, because I think that piece around trust is essential. I think that's up to us to show you that we're serious, and words don't really mean anything, it's action. So if we could meet again and show what we've been doing. I think there's a communication piece. I think what you're saying around accessibility is really important, and I think it's how we make it relevant to everyone. How we show that actually there are opportunities for jobs, and that there's so much within this, how we translate it into daily life and how we make it. There's that gap again between policy. We know the science, we know the solutions, we know what we need to do, how we personalize that and bring it to life. So yeah, we'll meet again and we'll tell you what we've done, and we'll try to build on that trust, because I recognize that. But I also think we need to come back with examples of how we're going to communicate better, because I think there's a massive issue there and how it is made more accessible. But brilliant point.
And Minister, to pick up one of the points, more done when Stormont wasn't existing is what is being felt there by some.
So, see, for all of its faults, I would rather have devolved government than Boris Johnson any day, right? And when our devolved institutions were down, our waiting lists grew longer. It wasn't a good thing. And we can debate how and why that happened, right? But I do think that the closer decision makers are to local people, the better. What I would say is around when you said, and one of the guys over here said it as well, like, we're not interested in politics. Climate change is not politics. Climate change is politics, right? Politics is about power. The problem in this place of ours is that we think that politics means orange versus green. And it doesn't. We need to kind of try to change that. Everything, when you have people who hold more power than others, that's politics. So we need to be saying to politicians, this is politics. Climate change is politics, and you're a politician, so your job is to fix this. The other thing I would say is around accessibility. There's challenges with young people accessing government, but there should not be like accessibility barriers between me and you. If you live in North Belfast, I'm your MLA for North Belfast, you absolutely have a right to meet me, to talk to me, to tell me what you think I should be working on in North Belfast, holding me account and challenging me about what I'm not doing right for the people of North Belfast. So, approach MLAs, approach councillors, meet with them. And then the other thing is this too, politicians are not a species away over here, they're you and I. So if you feel that you can find a political party that you feel is your home, join it. Join it, change the policies of the party, grow up, and if you feel that you want to do it, step in the electoral politics as well. Rather than lobbying people in power to make decisions, set out to be those people who are in power taking those decisions.
Clear frustration there, and that must be in itself frustration for you.
Okay, what's your name? Amy. Right, there's a lot of really prolific tweeters in here, Barra, yourself included. I claim the tweet, climate is not a political issue, poverty is not a political issue. And from that, taken from what Nicola, it's not an ideological issue. We know what we have to do. They're both complicated issues. We know what we have to do to fix them both. We know what we have to do. So the politics comes in about the getting it done. Poverty, we know we have to just make sure that people can access more money to feed their children. So I think Nicola, you're right. Politicians are you and me, but young people, they're not young people. What I hear from young people is that huge disconnect between politicians. They don't see what you do in your constituency, what Kate does in hers, what Seamus does in his. What they see is that rhetoric in the media. So it's how, you're absolutely right, you should engage with local politics or create your own. So I think one of the things I'm taking away is to remove the ideology from climate change and poverty, and to go with what the facts and what the experiences of the people who are living and barely breathing it, trying to breathe it, are going with, and making politics get the job done. That's what politics is about. It's about getting the job done, making the change that needs to happen. So Amy, you've got the tweet. Anyone tweets that, I'm going to have you. I claim that tweet, and thank you, Amy. I will accredit you with it.
Thanks very much, Amy, for your point there. And just time to get a final reflection on this, on the findings from yourselves. What do you think overall?
I think your responses have largely been like, oh, we need to be doing this and we need to be doing that, rather than actual things that you're going to do. So for the listening to citizens, when will this climate assembly that you mentioned start? You mentioned one for infrastructure, and then you also mentioned something about oil and gas going to your department. So are you going to ban that from happening, the oil and gas infrastructure? So yes, I think we've been talking about governmental action, but we'd like to hear what you're going to do practically and like actual examples. And about the youth assembly point, not everyone is in the youth assembly, so I know I applied for it, but I didn't get into the youth assembly. So we need to try to listen to other young people. Like I've been in groups, like we put in the effort to create groups to get governmental action. So we need to listen to young people's groups as well as youth assemblies. And yeah.
And reflections on it yourself?
Yeah, I think we all had reflection on each of the section of the survey. So would you like us to go up and do that now?
Yeah, sure, if you want to give me that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm doing a reflection on the knowledge and understanding of the climate crisis and how young people are accessing information. Well, first of all, it was very encouraging to find that the vast majority have some level of knowledge and understanding of climate change. Having a good understanding of the main climate-related issues gives young people the confidence to voice their opinions and to ask to be heard by decision makers, and also reflect on their own behaviors and activities and how we can reduce the impact of climate change. I believe the school strikes for climate have had an important role in raising awareness levels. And on one hand, pupils participating in the strikes spark discussions among their peers for their reasons for striking. But at the same time, one of the key demands of the school strikes has been for adequate climate communication by mainstream media and governments, but also for environmental education to be incorporated in the curriculum. For example, the Tell the Truth and Teach the Future campaigns. I believe that over the last year, the media have increased and improved their environmental coverage. For example, extreme weather events across the globe were for the first time clearly attributed to climate change. We've had quite a few nature documentaries specifically on the risk of the climate crisis and extinction of species, and we've seen increased reporting on the youth strikes for climate and environmental initiatives. However, in education, this is lacking greatly. The curriculum is not yet formally updated, and the importance of this crisis cannot be overstated. However, many schools and teachers have taken the initiative and started incorporating environmental education in their own classrooms and in their school programs. So these developments in the media and coverage and education have likely helped with the level of climate awareness, particularly in recent months. As we have heard earlier, the majority of young people are concerned or very to extremely concerned about climate change. And this tells me that we are accessing reliable information, as we were talking about earlier, as opposed to disinformation and climate denial, which unfortunately are still around. But understanding the true scale of the challenge we face and the slow pace of mitigating actions by local governments can affect young people's mental well-being. It can lead to eco-anxiety, to feelings of powerlessness, to affect change, or even pessimism around the future. And around a third of the survey had around a third of the people surveyed had already been affected in some way. And the main channel through which young people access information is, unsurprisingly, social media. This is where we find reports from professional media like papers and TV, but also information provided directly by scientists, many of whom now communicate openly or in a way that is more accessible to the public. And this enables young people to evaluate how politicians' communications and actions measure up to the climate crisis. This situation is also reflected in the trust scores. Scientists, educational institutions, and environmental organizations are perceived as the most trustworthy, followed by family and friends. However, as we were talking about earlier, young people have lower confidence in the information coming from local politicians and the Northern Ireland government, so there is a huge gap. But how can this be improved? Well, I believe that trust will be built when the government and political communications clearly and accurately reflect the science and the challenges of the climate crisis. Equally helpful is to see how decisions taken by the executive and public authorities have climate and the wider environment at their heart, to engage on multiple platforms and make information accessible for everybody without as free from spin as possible. But my conclusion from this section of the survey is that as climate awareness increases and the impacts of climate change at home and abroad become even more obvious, it is essential that young people feel informed, that they feel listened to, and that they are listened to and protected. And this will empower them to engage with the topic, with politicians, and to feel more positive about the future overall.
And finally, to yourself, Celeste.
Yeah, so what do we do with the impacts of climate change? Mustn't forget the figure of 87% of young people believe that something can be done and it's not too late. And we talked about earlier that everyone does have a role in combating climate change, and most of us know, we reduce plastic, go on the new buses that we're talking about. But as I sort of touched on earlier, half of young people are doing those things, but the other half aren't doing them or don't know that they should be doing them. So that's concerning to me that they haven't been taking action. So today we should be doing more to bring everyone into the conversation and letting their voices be heard. And repeating a bit more about what Andrew was saying, but it's the responsibility of each person. But the opinion in the survey was that the UK government is the what the young people of our survey says the main responsibility lies. So this may well reflect the global challenge in the current zeitgeist of COP26 to respond to the opportunity for collective action. But 53% of our respondents said they were more likely to act if people in power and elected representatives were to make more effort to protect the environment. 53% of respondents also said that they need general information on how they can affect climate change. But more detail on that is that some individuals say specific subjects that they would like to learn more about. And surprisingly, well, I found surprisingly, the highest response was in sustainable energy. So this information helps key stakeholders to identify that young people are interested in sustainable future and how we can make the impact, but we need that information right now. So how do we get that message across? And we sort of brushed on the fact about that online, and I'm reading this from my phone right now. We all have a computer basically in our hands, and that's how we're finding out our information. And that's where our respondents have taken action on climate change, and the most popular reason why they have decided to make their action is from social media and online. So we can use this revolutionized communication in a way of responding to climate change in the future, and maybe we can bring that more into the conversation as well.
Okay, thank you. Can we give our panelists and everyone a big round of applause, please? Thank you very much for all your information. Thank you for tackling some of our very difficult questions. There are many more questions that need to be answered, and I'm sure they will be in the coming weeks, months, and years ahead. For the time being, though, I'd like to invite up for some final reflections the Belfast Climate Commission co-chairs, John Barry and Debbie Cardwell of Climate Commission. Oh, sorry, Sorry, can I ask you just to pause just 1 wee second? I thought that our first panelist here had given their reaction, Shad, so I'm going to give her a chance. Sorry.
Yes, so this is sort of my formal reaction to the survey findings. So my part of covering it is the future implications of the findings. So, and it should be noted that by in future, I mean tomorrow or even sooner, since the climate crisis is now and we can't afford any more time to really wait. Since we're headed to meet 1.5 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels by 2025, this is the kind of fast change I'm talking about. Since this is why the current COP26 is so important, because we have 4 years until we reach 1.5 degrees. So 88% of people agreed, or strongly agreed, that we all have a role to play in protecting our environment. This is true, we all have things we can do, and people should do what feels like an effective action. However, some of us hold more responsibility and power over others, and the more power you have, the greater your responsibility. You should, so it's good to empower people to change, but you have to do what you're saying as well. Since we are headed towards 1.5, every single person needs to play their part. And as well as our climate footprints, we also have climate shadows. So how are we talking about the climate crisis and what impression are we leaving? 55% of young people they agreed with the statement that they feel ignored. So it surprised me. I thought it was surprisingly low, 55%, but yeah. But putting my experience aside, it solidifies the unspoken rule that politicians aren't listening to young people. And like I said before, how do we define listening? A solution to this was in our recommendations, an independent youth climate commissioner who's responsible for advocating on young people's behalfs and concerns and reaching out to us to hear our views if the said Citizens Assembly and the suggestion of us being on committees isn't possible. 67% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that it's too late to do anything about climate change. I mean, as a youth activist, I kind of have to disagree, because if we don't do anything, there's still time to act. We have to act very fast, but there's still time. And 74% agreed with a stronger focus on greater employment opportunities. So it shows a demand for fulfilling green jobs that benefit our environment. And we should all be aware of our options to take environmentally beneficial jobs. And there should be a focus on creating more green jobs as we make a just transition out of COVID-19. And young people shouldn't be stuck with low-paid, unfulfilling work. There should be opportunities for us to work in nature, to protect nature and rebuild nature. And yes, so the green jobs intersect with other issues. It intersects with green infrastructure, and that's not just about green infrastructure. It's about health as well, from the air pollution that vehicles cause and the deaths that air pollution cause every year. So yeah.
Sorry to miss you out there. Apologies, my apologies. But yes, I would now like to welcome up co-chairs John Barry and Debbie Caldwell. Thank you very much. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks very much. John and I are going to do a double act here, a bit like kind of yin and yang. So I was just going to give a few key takeaways, but before I do that, I just want to say a few thank yous. First of all, a big thank you to the Youth Working Group for pulling this event together, but not just for this, but for the survey and all the work that's been done all through the year, because that group's done some fantastic things, and I think you've shown some real leadership there, so thanks very much. A big thank you to Chloe. Well done for standing up here. It's pretty scary up here, so really glad you could do it. To Andra, Dara, Georgia, and Celeste as well. A big thank you to Maria Arroy, who can't be here today because she's in Glasgow at the COP. And thank you to Teresa and Richard over there. If you guys want to raise your hands for pulling all this together and doing all the coordination. So thanks very much for that. To Johnny Byrne from Ulster University for helping to create the survey and to drafting that report. To Café Nosh for all that great food that you had when you came in, and lastly to Barra for comparing. So my key takeaways really from what you've been saying today is that there is a huge concern among young people about the negative impact of climate change. And I take note from the survey that this is really affecting people's mental health, and I find that really scary. And I think that we should all reflect on that. However, I'm really glad that you're still hopeful that there's something that can be done to avert the sort of biggest impacts of climate change. And, you know, it's really good to hear about all the positive things that are happening in the transport sector, living with water, the green growth strategy, and so on. So I'm glad that there is some positivity that's left here. And many of you are already taking action, certainly around reducing plastics, but also in active travel. I think that came across really strongly in the survey results. And I hope that you will take heart today from the fact that we have politicians in the room. You know, we've got councillors, Minister Mallon here, Lord Mayor, and we've also got Aaron Wright from DERA here, so we've got two ministries here, so I hope you take heart from that. But one of the really worrying things that came out of the survey and from what you've been saying today is that the level of trust for the information that you're getting is actually really low from politicians and from government compared to scientists and teachers and so on. And there's a feeling that you're not being listened to. And I think we need to do something about this because you want things to change and you want to be part of that change. You want better information and education on how you can make a difference. You want training for teachers, and you want a sharper focus on green jobs and green opportunities. And you want more done to encourage others to make sustainable decisions. So I guess our job really is to find a way of empowering you to lead the green revolution. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to John. But by the way, I really like your idea of having that independent youth climate commissioner, and I would really welcome that. So thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. In August, we had Code Red for Humanity about the climate crisis. To me, this is Code Red for Generation Climate in our city of Belfast. I mean, the figures are truly shocking and disturbing, your frustration, your passion, the fact that this is impacting on you in a major way. I think that's something we really need to take into account. And I can't help but think that some of the frustration, and we need to have these honest conversations about this, that it's adding to your climate anxiety when you don't see the institutions and the politicians and the governance system set up to protect you not doing their job. So I'm going to leave you with three things in terms of what I would suggest in terms of steps forward. Educate, communicate, and agitate. The first one on education is to satisfy yourself as to your own understanding of the climate crisis. Ourselves in the academy are not very good at communicating in a reader or listener-friendly way. It's a story. What is the story the climate crisis is telling us right here, right now, in the early part of the 21st century? And I think we need to connect the climate crisis to class, the climate crisis to injustice, the climate crisis to poverty. And by the way, we don't have a poverty problem in our society, we have a wealth problem. It's very different. To switch it around, it's a wealth problem we have, not a poverty problem. Communicate. Talk about this issue with family and friends, because we're at the beginning of learning about the climate and what it means and how we understand it. And I think we also have to recognize, and again, academics are not very good at this, particularly male academics, at expressing the emotional impact of this. That's what really comes out from this survey. I've been teaching this stuff for 30 years, and I'm a fairly happy, energetic person, so I'm not depressed, but I think I may be a carrier. Because the knowledge that I carry about the future, I just get so used to it. Casually trotting out hundreds of thousands of climate-displaced people, parts of the earth uninhabitable, we're now going through the 6th great mass extinction event without really fully appreciating how that lands with people for whom this is very, very new. So I think the emotional impact has to be there, and it would be great to see our politicians, our leaders, and particularly I speak to my own profession, to get out of the academy into our communities, get out of the academy into City Hall to talk to people, particularly around the science, but also, as I say, the emotional impact of this. And last but by no means least, agitate. Turn out tomorrow for the climate march starting at 12 o'clock and City Hall here at 1 o'clock. Use your voice, even if you don't have a vote. Power, if you go up and see a wonderful mural off the Falls Road of Frederick Douglass, a freed African-American slave back in the 19th century, he said something very, very wise. Power and the status quo concedes nothing without a struggle. We are not going to get a solution to the climate crisis at a COP26 across in Glasgow, important as they are. It's going to require citizens using their voice as best they can, certainly working through the normal democratic system, but we are going to need a lot more agitation, demanding our politicians do better, demanding our academics do better. I often think there's a lot of unused academic knowledge and power, knowledge power, that has not been mobilised in this. My own view is that we're in a wartime mobilisation. That's the crisis that we're facing. We have a very short window of opportunity to make the change, and you deserve nothing less. And I want to leave you last with hope. Hope comes from me from agency, a sense of either individual or collective action working together towards a common goal. Elon Musk ain't going to save us, folks. Technology ain't going to save us. With the best in the world, government is not going to save us. And goodness knows academics ain't going to save us. We all need to collectively figure out how we can work together. We need everybody behind this. And I think what's lacking at the moment is a sense of a common vision. And I speak now not just as a lapsed but completely collapsed Catholic, but the Bible has some good lines. Without vision, the people perish. Where is our vision for this place, for this island, for our planet in terms of the future? Why is it that for many of you in the audience here today, it's actually probably easier for you to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, the system that's at the root of a lot of the problems that we're talking about? We have people in our society for whom they can't even begin to think about the end of the world because they're worrying about the end of the week to feed their kids. We have to connect climate justice with issues of socioeconomic inequality. So for me, it's been a salutary read, the survey, quite sobering. As I say, it's a wake-up call. It is code red for Generation Climate here in Belfast. And certainly I want to see as many of you on the streets of Belfast tomorrow doing what Belfast does best, out loud and proud and making your voice heard. So stay safe, wash your hands, and socially distance from consumerism. Take care. Good night.
Okay, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's about it for this evening. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you got your question answered and made your point. And hopefully in the future I won't be reporting on as many extreme weather situations that we have seen recently. High amounts of rainfall leading to flooding, bitterly cold winter nights, hot summer days, and everything else. And hopefully we can look forward to the future with a little bit of brightness. So thank you very much for everybody, and farewell and safe home.